The closed-door policy roundtable in Washington, D.C., carried the feel of a carefully staged media event. George Soros, the billionaire political influencer, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, surrounded by like-minded lawmakers, journalists, and think tank representatives. His presence projected authority. This was his space, his agenda, and in his view, his terms. Directly across from him sat Karoline Levitt, calm but resolute. She wasn't invited to contribute as an equal. She was positioned as a lone dissenting voice, a young conservative meant to be outnumbered and sidelined. But Karoline had no intention of staying on the defensive. She came ready to challenge what she saw as a globalist agenda undermining U.S. sovereignty. The discussion opened in a predictable way. Soros spoke in a measured, deliberate tone about protecting democracy and promoting open borders. His remarks drew approving nods from allies, but Karoline immediately recognized the selective framing. When she raised her first challenge, that Soros funding initiative had increased crime rates and destabilized communities, the mood in the room shifted. A few brows lifted. The cameras adjusted. The cameras shifted toward her. Soros gave a short, dismissive chuckle. "Young lady," he began, "I've been shaping policy on a global scale since before you were born. You can't expect to grasp the complexities here." Karoline's answer came without hesitation. "And yet, with all that experience, you've managed to turn thriving communities into dangerous ones. I understand that just fine." The room stirred. Soros' smirk slipped. He leaned forward slightly, signaling the polite exchanges were over. Karoline's words had landed, and she knew it. The conversation began to splinter as a statement lingered like an unwelcome truth. Some shifted uncomfortably, unaccustomed to seeing Soros directly challenged in a setting he controlled, leaning back. Soros steepled his fingers, a faint flash of irritation in his eyes. "I see," he said slowly, his accent sharpening his delivery. "You've come here to lecture me on matters far beyond your political understanding." His tone carried intellectual superiority, but the edge of anger was unmistakable. Karoline didn't waver. "What you call understanding, Mr. Soros, most Americans call common sense. You can fund all the studies you like, but real-world evidence shows your policies hurt working families." Her voice stayed steady and firm, as though she spoke for those never invited into rooms like this. The tension grew with each exchange. Soros' allies cut in, repeating talking points about economic justice and global responsibility. Karoline addressed each one with precision, using data, examples, and lived realities that were difficult to deflect. Soros' patience was wearing thin. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. "This is my meeting," he said firmly, "and I will not have it derailed by baseless accusations." Without missing a beat, Karoline replied, "Then perhaps you should stop giving me so much to work with." The room froze. A wave of muted gasps passed among the attendees. Soros' jaw tightened. His voice rose, no longer measured, but edged with a loss of composure that comes when a carefully managed image is under direct attack. They were seconds from the now infamous get-out moment. The air felt heavier, charged with tension. Soros gripped the edge of the table, his usual control slipping. What had been sharp debate now hovered on the verge of open confrontation. Karoline stayed unmoving, her gaze fixed on him, refusing to yield. She was no longer simply responding to arguments. She was questioning the very core of his influence. That it became clear she had no intention of following the unspoken rules of polite political exchange. Finally, Soros leaned forward, his voice cutting through the air. "Get out!" The words weren't just loud. They carried a venom that made several attendees flinch. It was a command, not a request, and it carried the frustration of someone unaccustomed to losing control publicly. For a moment, silence held. All eyes turned to Karoline, waiting to see if she would back down or de-escalate. Instead, she leaned in slightly, her tone calm but sharp, the kind of calm that comes from confidence. "You can shout all you want," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the room. "But the truth doesn't leave here just because you tell me to. And neither do I." That was a line that turned a tense exchange into a viral moment. Phones discreetly recording caught every word and every flicker of Soros' expression as he realized he had underestimated her. This wasn't just a young voice to be brushed aside. This was someone capable of turning his platform against him in real time. The moment Karoline's words cut through the silence, the energy shifted from tense to electric. This was no longer simply a clash of talking points. It was a collision of two political worlds that a few attendees exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some smirked quietly, enjoying the reversal. Others found it uncomfortable to watch, their gaze drifting away from the table. Soros, still seated but visibly unsettled, leaned back with a faint, incredulous smile, one that did little to hide his irritation. Control seemed momentarily out of his reach. Karoline, however, remained steady in her seat, her posture a clear statement that she wasn't leaving, not physically, politically, or rhetorically did I end the back of the room. Several attendees angled their phones for a better view. Clips of the exchange were already hitting social media in real time, hashtags multiplying within minutes. Her line, "The truth doesn't leave this room just because you tell me to," began trending almost immediately. Conservative commentators called it a textbook example of fearlessness, while critics rushed to frame it as calculated grandstanding. By the time the meeting limped to its next topic, it was obvious the agenda had been overtaken. The real story was unfolding online. Twitter thread dissected facial expressions. TikTok loops set her quote to triumphant music, and news outlets raced to publish before the moment passed. Karoline didn't check her phone, but she didn't need to. Soros' expression told her everything. This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a moment that would follow them both well beyond that room. Soros took a deliberate breath, trying to reclaim control. The tension was thicker now, almost visible. His usually calm presence was showing cracks. He adjusted his jacket, leaned slightly forward at the podium, and spoke with measured precision. "Let's be clear," he began, his voice carrying the practiced blend of authority and persuasion built over decades. "This isn't about personalities. This isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about the direction of the country, about ensuring that rational policies shape our future." But the problem was, the audience wasn't thinking about rational policies. They were replaying the moment when, in a flash of frustration, he had told Karoline Leavitt to get out. A raw, unscripted outburst doesn't disappear under a polished talking point. Standing a few feet away, Karoline could read the room. She saw it in the subtle smiles, raised brows, and the way some leaned forward as if anticipating another round. She let him talk for half a minute before deciding the timing was right. When Soros paused to sip water, she stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Soros," she said evenly, her tone carrying a quiet edge, "you say this isn't about personalities, yet you made it personal the moment you tried to remove me from this conversation." A low murmur swept through the room. She didn't raise her voice, but every word landed firmly. "You can't claim to defend democracy while silencing those who challenge you. That's not leadership, that's fear." For a brief moment, Soros froze, long enough for cameras to capture it. Karoline's words weren't aimed solely at him. They were for the live stream viewers, and for every clip that would circulate online within minutes. She knew that in the age of viral sound bites, seizing the moment could matter more than winning the policy argument. Soros glanced at his notes, perhaps looking for the perfect counter, but the shift had already occurred. The balance in the room had changed, and everyone knew it. His earlier authority seemed diminished, replaced with a realization that he had underestimated her. The audience wasn't just watching a policy debate anymore. They were witnessing a generational and ideological clash. People in the front row leaned forward, phones ready to capture what might become the next viral exchange. In the back, quiet whispers followed the two figures like commentary at a prize fight. Karoline didn't need to raise her volume. Her confidence came from the way she held the microphone, kept direct eye contact, and let her pauses draw the room in. "You've spent decades pulling strings behind the curtain," she said, voice steady but pointed. "But America isn't a puppet stage, and I'm not here to follow your script." A faint ripple passed through the crowd. Even some who disagreed with her politically couldn't ignore the precision of the hit. Soros adjusted his glasses, a small movement, but one that signaled unease to anyone watching closely. Control seemed briefly beyond his grasp. Karoline, however, stayed composed in her seat, her posture making it clear she wasn't going anywhere, not physically, politically, or in her argument. The back of the room, several attendees shifted their phone for a clearer shot. Clips of the exchange were already spreading across social media in real time, hashtags multiplying by the minute. Her line, "The truth doesn't leave this room just because you tell me to," began trending almost instantly. Supporters hailed it as a model of courage, while critics quickly labeled it as calculated showmanship. be by the time the meeting edged into its next agenda item, it was obvious the original focus had been overtaken. The real story was happening online. Twitter threads analyzed every expression. TikTok loops paired her word with triumphant music, and news outlets scrambled to post headlines before the moment passed. Karoline didn't check her phone. She didn't have to. Soros' expression told her she had made an impact that would outlast a meeting. Soros drew a deliberate breath, trying to reassert control. The air was thicker now, almost tangible. His trademark composure showed cracks. Adjusting his jacket, he leaned toward the podium and spoke with careful precision. "Let's be clear," he began, his voice carrying the practiced mix of authority and persuasion honed over decades. "This isn't about personalities. This isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about the country's direction, about making sure rational policies shape our future." The problem was, the audience wasn't thinking about policy. They were still replaying the moment he had, in frustration, told Karoline Leavitt to get out. An unfiltered outburst like that can't be erased by a polished statement dot a few feet away. Karoline read the shift in the room. She caught the faint smiles, the raised brows, the way people leaned forward as though waiting for the next round. She let him speak for about 30 seconds, then seized a moment when he paused to sip water. "Mr. Soros," she said evenly, her tone calm but edged, "you say this isn't about personalities, but you made it personal when you tried to push me out of this discussion." A low murmur moved through the room. Her voice didn't rise, but each word carried weight. "You can't claim to defend democracy while silencing those who question you. That's not leadership, that's fear." For a brief moment, Soros froze, just long enough for the cameras to capture it. Karoline's words weren't just for him. They were aimed at a live stream audience and the inevitable clips that would circulate within minutes. She knew that in the viral age, winning the moment often outweighed winning the policy points. Soros glanced down at his notes, perhaps searching for the right counter, but the shift had already happened. His authority in the room had thinned, replaced by the awareness that he had underestimated her. This was no longer just a policy discussion. It had become a clash of generations and ideologies. In the front row, attendees leaned forward, phones ready to record the next potential flashpoint. In the back, whispers moved between spectators like commentary at a prize fight. Karoline didn't need to shout. Her confidence came from the way she held a microphone, kept unwavering eye contact, and let her pauses command attention. "You spent decades pulling strings behind the curtain," she said, her tone steady but pointed. "But America isn't a puppet stage, and I'm not here to read from your script." A faint ripple moved through the crowd. Even those who opposed her politically couldn't deny the accuracy of the strike. Soros adjusted his glasses, a small movement, but one that revealed discomfort to anyone watching closely. Every line she delivered landed like a blow, each fact honed to precision. By now, the room's attention was locked on her. Even those who had walked in doubting her stance were leaning forward, drawn in by her command of the facts and her refusal to yield. She wasn't simply defending herself. She was forcing him to play defense on his own ground. The atmosphere felt charged, almost electric, as George Soros leaned forward, his voice low but cutting, wrapped in decades of political power. "You think you can walk in here, challenge everything I built, and face no consequences?" His eyes locked on hers, his tone steeped in disdain. The earlier outburst, the now infamous get out, still lingered in everyone's minds. This time, though, his strike was calculated, aimed at damaging reputations. Reporters in the room froze, pens hovering, cameras ready to capture every flicker of reaction. Karoline didn't flinch, not even a blink. If anything, the corner of her mouth lifted in the faintest smirk. She had been underestimated before, by the press, by seasoned political figures, by those who thought age and status were shields against challenge. She understood this moment was bigger than either of them. This wasn't simply Soros versus Karoline. It was two competing visions for America colliding in real time. "You've built an empire on fear," she said, her voice steady, each word hitting with force. "And now you're afraid of someone who won't bow to it. That's why you shouted at me. That's why you want me gone. Because the second I speak the truth, your narrative breaks." Her words were deliberate, echoing through the space, prompting murmurs among the press. Soros' jaw tightened. The man known for dominating conversations was now being challenged in front of an audience that sensed vulnerability. He tried to cut in, But Karoline lifted her hand slightly, not rudely, but with the authority of someone who knew she held the floor. "You told me to get out," she continued, her tone gathering momentum. "But you don't get to decide who has a voice in this country. You can't bully people into silence just because you can write a bigger check. You may have influence, Mr. Soros, but I have a truth, and the truth doesn't answer to you." Gasps cut through the silence, followed by a rapid burst of camera shutters. It was a kind of moment destined to explode online within hours. Clipped, shared, debated. The political heavyweight versus the unapologetic newcomer. Karoline stepped forward, closing the gap just enough to make her resolve clear. "You can tell me to leave 100 times," she said, her voice dropping into a near whisper that still carried across the room. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not today, not tomorrow, and certainly not because you told me to." Now it wasn't just an exchange of words. It was a battle of wills. The audience could feel the shift. For perhaps the first time in years, Soros looked like a man who'd lost control of the narrative. Karoline, on the other hand, looked like someone who had just seized it. The moment hung in the air, sharp, clear, and impossible to ignore that Soros' glare held. But the damage was done. The get-out he had thrown minutes earlier had transformed from a command into a rallying cry for Karoline Leavitt's supporters, already flooding social media. Clips of her fiery response were being cut, captioned, and shared at lightning speed, amplifying the shock wave through the political arena. Soros shifted back in his chair, recalculating. The man who had long mastered narrative control could feel it slipping. For years, his presence alone had silenced opposition. But this time, the person across from him wasn't merely countering his words. She was dismantling his air of untouchable authority, piece by piece. In real time, Karoline, still standing tall, glanced at the rows of cameras. This wasn't grandstanding. Karoline was making sure every American watching would remember one thing. She didn't back down. "Mr. Soros," she said, her tone calm enough to sting. "People like you think you can dictate who belongs in this conversation. But you forget something. This isn't your country alone, and it sure as hell isn't for sale." Gasps rippled through the room. Soros leaned forward, hands clasped tightly, a faint twitch betraying his frustration. He made a final attempt to cut in, but Karoline didn't grant him the satisfaction of another spar. Instead, she turned slightly toward the audience, a subtle, unmistakable shift in who she was really speaking to. "You told me to get out," she said, voice now carrying the weight of a closer. "But I'm staying right here. I'm staying in this fight because if I leave, you win. And I'm not here to make life comfortable for billionaires who think they own America. I'm here for the people who are tired of being told they don't matter." Each line landed like a gavel strike, deliberate, final. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras pushing closer, hungry for every second. This wasn't just a soundbite anymore. It was a kind of moment that lodges itself in political memory. Soros sat back, understanding the upper hand was gone. The duel was over, and in the court of public opinion, Karoline had won. When she stepped away from the table, applause began in the back, tentative at first, then swelling into something undeniable. It was unplanned, unscripted, a raw endorsement of her stand. Outside, her phone was already buzzing. Messages from allies, strangers, even political rivals who couldn't help but acknowledge the force of what had just unfolded. In that moment, she wasn't just a young conservative who had gone toe-to-toe with George Soros. She was the embodiment of what it looks like to refuse silence. And for the first time in years, Soros wasn't the one controlling the story. What happened between them was more than a fiery exchange. It was a collision of two visions for America, one meant to silence dissent, the other unwilling to be moved. Soros' get out was intended to shut her down. Instead, it became the spark for one of the most defiant moments of her career. Karoline didn't just answer back. She turned the moment inside out, proving that money and influence can't smother conviction. Her words were sharp, her presence immovable, and her message clear. If you want her gone, you'll need more than a raised voice. That air's applause echoed and the clips exploded online. It was no longer just about one confrontation. It had become something bigger. The fight to be heard, the right to stand your ground, and the truth that sometimes the loudest thing you can say is that you're not going anywhere.